Shaunti, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you.
Yes. Well, I'm super excited to have you. I know that, one of the things that we really love is when you have an author speaker who also focuses on research, because I think there's so much that comes out of that, so validating, and it just gives a different perspective to our listeners. So I'm going to jump right in there. And, for today, one of the goals of the show is to really talk about how it doesn't require big changes, just small things can make a big change in your marriage. And, I know that's what the premise of your book that we're going to be talking about, the surprising secrets of highly happy marriages. How did you kind of delve into this subject matter, and what were some of the findings?
It's interesting as a researcher, this is one of the, I think, funnest projects that I did, because what I was actually studying, I should explain, what I was studying was the most happily married couples. I was trying to figure out what's the secret sauce, right? What are these people doing differently that's making them so happy, and maybe, doing differently from even people in good marriages, not necessarily even, ones that are struggling. And it was fun as I started looking at them. I will tell you right up front, I was actually kind of worried that what I was going to find was that what they all do differently is this big, huge stuff, or that it wasn't little things that they do differently, but that they all came from intact families, or that they all had, that their temperaments were perfectly meshed together, or, those kinds of things. And, because you can't exactly say to somebody, who's trying to improve their marriage, you can't say, oh, well, sorry, your parents shouldn't have gotten divorced. You can't, that's not going to help.
Right.
And so I was really thrilled and encouraged and kind of surprised, honestly, when what kept coming up in the surveys was that it's not that big stuff. Yeah. It's not whether they had a similar temperament. That didn't even come up on the radar screen. And instead, it was these little day-to-day habits that these happy couples tended to do differently, sometimes subconsciously, without even realizing that they were actually doing something that was really meaningful.
Right. And so, I was fascinated by this because I had the same kind of, as I started to read this book, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, it's going to be like this massive, you have to have this communication down perfectly. And,
yeah, exactly.
I didn't even think about the temperament part, because you think about a couple who is maybe struggling and they're already looking for the final nail in the coffin. It's like, well, we didn't do that part right, so this is doomed. Maybe tell us a little bit about, some of the early findings of these little things, these habits that you talk about, and how they can make a dramatic shift in the relationship.
So here's some of the things that we found. What we found actually is that there were 12 little habits that we saw tended to be, in a lot of ways, completely different from what everybody else was doing. Like I said, even people in generally happy marriages. And probably the most important one, the one that I always kind of start with, it's almost, I think it's basically a prerequisite. I'm unlike everything else, this one, I'm not sure that you can be happy in your marriage without this. I think you have to have this if you want to be married happily. And it's to believe the best of your spouse's intentions towards you, even when you're legitimately hurt. Because we all get hurt, right? The happiest couples, they hurt each other's feelings too, just like anybody else. The difference is what happened inside mentally and emotionally when that happened. Because it's a real sort of standard operating procedure for us human beings that when we're hurt, we tend to have this kind of knee-jerk subconscious feeling like, ow, my husband, he knew how that would make me feel and he said it anyway. Right. And without realizing it, what you're thinking to yourself is, he doesn't care about me. I mean, that's kind of what that translates to.
It's a natural conclusion. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, that's kind of what that means. And it was interesting, these happily married couples, and many of them had started off pretty miserable in their marriages and had become very happy. And one of the things that made that shift was that they would go, ow, that hurt, but no, I know he loves me. I know he cares about me. So he must not have known how that would make me feel, or he wouldn't have said it. And it's believing the best of their intentions towards you. And the thing is that it's the amazing thing, once I actually started studying this, it's not wishful thinking. It turns out that the vast majority of people really, really care about their spouse. They really love or appreciate their spouse. And even in like when there's difficulties, even I think the number was 99.37% or something of the people on the survey, even in the really struggling couples. The question is, what do you believe about the person's intentions? Do you think that they care, or do you think that they don't? And the answer to that really is one of the key answers to whether you're going to have a happy marriage or not.
Yeah, and and I think you had mentioned in your book that there was a group that you actually did this in I think it was a first responder, maybe a police, like a couples retreat, and you had them ask these questions, and I found that to be so fascinating in terms of they all had the the belief that their spouse had their best interest, but then when they asked, and I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but on the reverse side, and what was causing all the problems was this other understanding. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was actually what happened is that they did have their spouses. Everybody had goodwill towards their spouse. Like every husband, every wife. I mean, it was like 95% or something. I can't remember what the number was, but they basically, almost 100, said that they deeply cared about their spouse. Right. And then I asked, as a separate question, do you believe that your spouse, like I asked the wives, do you believe that your spouse loves you? Do you believe that your husbands love you? And I asked the husbands, do you believe your wife appreciates you? Right? And the problem is only something like 45% of the spouses thought that they were loved or appreciated.
Wow.
So it's almost 100 do, but if we don't believe it, that right there is the disconnect.
Right.
And this is where all of us have seen.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen it. I've seen it. Every counselor in the country has seen it. Is that once you start having hurt feelings and once things make you upset and once there's friction, it is so easy to look at something someone does and say, nothing I do is ever good enough for her. I try and she just doesn't appreciate me. No, I can't. I might as well just stop because nothing I do is ever good enough. And the reality is she does appreciate you. It's just we are all stupid people and we all do things that make the other person think we don't. And so we have to have that goodwill and believe in the intentions of our spouse if we want to be happily married. Because once you start letting yourself believe, he just doesn't care, she just doesn't appreciate me, it's so hard to come back from that. And it's not even true, right? You're sabotaging a relationship for no reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so I love how you say this is a starting point. You really, without this understanding, it's really hard to have a great marriage, which I think is very, very true.
Well, think about it. If you don't believe this, what's going to happen? The next time that your wife, let's just say that you're a guy, and the next time you come home from work and it's 8 o'clock at night and you said you'd be home at 6:30. And she's like, don't you care about me? I feel like you don't care about me and the kids. And you as a guy are thinking, why do you think I'm working so hard? It's because I care about you. And so you answer in a way that's really defensive, like, well, thanks for the appreciation.
Right.
And then she's like, well, I've been with the kids all day and you don't appreciate me. And it all started because you assumed that she didn't appreciate you. And then but it started before then when she went to him and said, you don't care about me, you're working. No, if she would have just assumed he doesn't want to be away from you any more than you want him away from you. Right. You think he wants to be working this much?
Right.
And he's doing it because he cares about you. It all starts with, what am I assuming about whether my husband or my wife cares about me? And that's what that starts.
And there's a really powerful statement. I think you had talked about a couple, Sandy and her husband, and a similar situation, maybe a little bit different, but her, when he came home, there was a statement that she shared with him I think was so powerful because it really changed the environment. It changed the atmosphere in terms of what could have, played out that night. And I might kill this, but you can, being the author, you can tell me whether or not I hit it, but it was like, I know that you love me and that you care about me, and I know that you needed this time with your guy friends, which is a very different approach than I don't feel like you love me, or taking that assumption that you don't care about me.
Right. Well, and that's it right there. The scenario that I was talking about is this one woman I was interviewing, and I should explain everything in the book, everything that I do in general is based on two different types of input. It's interviews and focus groups, and then it's these big nationally representative surveys to quantify, what percentage of people does this apply to. And this is where we found that almost 100% of people deeply care about their spouse, but that only about half believe it. Mm-hmm. And that disconnect is where unhappiness comes from in marriage. And this story was illustrating a woman who actually helped preserve their happiness. And this is one of the really happy couples where he did something that was really, a lot of women would say was really inconsiderate. They needed this time that they were supposed to have as a couple. And he ended up spending too much time with his guy friends, and he ended up being exhausted and falling asleep and missing their date night. And it just was really hurtful to her. They had terrible things happening in their lives. They needed this time. Mm-hmm. And many of us as wives would have unleashed, right? I mean, we would have let him have it.
Right.
And instead, I watched what the happiest couples do differently. And they say things like, I'm really disappointed. We needed this time and we didn't get it because of the choice that you made, but I know you love me. And I know you needed this time with your friends too. We've had this terrible period and we needed each other, but we need our friends too. And, you made some choices about the number of hours and ended up falling asleep because you were so exhausted. But I know you love me. And so the guy, instead of being defensive and upset because she'd attacked him, he's like, I don't deserve you. You were such a sweet wife. And she's like, I know, but that's an example. It's not letting somebody off the hook.
Right.
Because she was legitimately disappointed, and he knew he had disappointed his wife.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make it up to her. But imagine the difference if she would have unleashed on him. Instead of saying, yeah, I'm disappointed, but I know it doesn't change that it doesn't change the fact that you care about me. Right there, if people are listening to this in kind of a shaky situation, you might think that it is so important to not let the other person off the hook. You might think it's important for you to be able to unleash. And we need to be able to say, this was wrong, or I'm disappointed, or, we need to be able to do that. But to not believe that they care, that's the problem. Yeah. And that's where I'm like, Dr. Phil's great line. How's that working for you?
Right.
Is that helping or hurting?
Yeah. You know what it comes to mind is that it seems that approach, it's like removing the poison from the conflict. Right?
Way of putting it.
It's one of those things where like the conflict's going to be there and it's okay to express the disappointment, but you're taking the poison out of it in order to move forward.
That's really good. I need to write that down.
It just hit me. I don't have many of these moments, but it just hit me. It was like, that's the poison that so often kills the relationship. Well, I think this sets a great precedence to move into what you call the Fantastic Five. And I love this. As you studied men and women and what do they need in the relationship, and what are these, what you call the highly happily married couples?
Highly happy couples, yeah.
Yeah. What tell us about that, the Fantastic Five.
So this was a fun one. I noticed that as I was interviewing and then eventually, quantified it on the survey, these happy couples, I noticed that the wives tended to do the same 5 things for the husbands, and that in the reverse, that the husbands tended to do the same 5 things for the wives. And this is not like, for example, I'm sure you're familiar with Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages.
Right.
Fantastic work, very important, find out what your spouse's love language and speak love in that language. Yes. If they don't like gifts, bringing them flowers isn't really going to say I love you, right? So that's important, but it's interesting. What I found was sort of layered on top of that or maybe you could say even more foundational than that, because these were the same 5 things. These weren't like find out what speaks love and do that. It was like, no, this speaks love, these 5 things.
Wow.
And so for the wives, for example, to the husbands, they tended to say thank you a lot. And it was interesting. I have been looking for years, ever since For Women Only, which was my first of these relationship series books to help women understand men.
Yeah.
Ever since For Women Only came out, I learned that for men, feeling respected and appreciated and trusted was so critical that they'd give up feeling loved if they had to feel appreciated and respected. I'd been trying to figure out, what can a wife say to a husband to make them feel in, a way that, for you as a woman, he just says, I love you. And it's like, oh, that's wonderful. But saying I love you to a husband is nice, but it doesn't really hit him in the same way. And I've been looking for what hits him. And this is finally it. I finally located it in this study, which is thank you. If you say thank you to your man, that is the equivalent of I love you to him. It's saying, I noticed what you did and it was good and I appreciate it. And that even the little day-to-day things, and actually mostly the little day-to-day things of life, like, you always put gas in my car so I don't run out of gas. Thank you for doing that. Or, I was so tired and you took Johnny to soccer so I didn't have to. Thank you.
Right.
These little, and then that stuff builds a guy up because that's what he most wants to feel. So that was the first thing that I noticed. That was huge. Another one of the Fantastic Five of the guys, and I know we don't have time to get into all of them, but another one of the biggies was saying something like that, or good job, in front of somebody else. Like, you tell the story when you're out to dinner, with a couple other, with another couple, and you turn to your girlfriend next to you and you say, you know what he did? I was so tired and he took Johnny to soccer. It was just so sweet of him. Your husband's there at the end of the table kind of looking all modest, and on the inside he's like, he's so excited, because you just praised him in front of somebody else.
Right.
And another one, probably no surprise, is that he knows you desire him sexually. Right. That's another one of the 5 things that I noticed, that it wasn't like, no, it doesn't mean that they had sex every day. That wasn't what I meant. But I noticed in the survey, and I noticed in the interviews, that they showed their husband they desired them. Whatever that looked like in their relationship, that for a guy feeling desired by his wife, it's one of the things I actually found for women only. It builds their confidence up. They sort of have a sense of well-being in all the other areas of their life. Yeah. So it's not surprising that would make a happy couple.
Right. That's so interesting. We do a lot with couples in the military and kind of all over the country. Yeah. And one of the things that we share around this whole thing of intimacy for the wives, which it validates what you're saying, is that, so many guys will say, I feel like she's just reluctantly accommodating me, but never pursuing me in this area of our relationship. And, I think, again, it goes to that, what's that emotional need? It's going to look different based on the sex. But, it's so powerful. I love how you've really made this so simple, right? I mean, it's not, because I think sometimes we look at relationships and how do you improve a relationship? It takes so much work and there's so much complexity to it.
No.
It's like lay down on the couch and let's go back into 20 years of your history. Not that that's not, But I think when I was reading through your book, you've kind of, you delved into that area of the secret behind happily married couples. And it's not just those who are in the happy camp, but the ones who are struggling, this is also available to them. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, a lot of these areas, I was really specifically focusing on, especially studying the happily married couples that didn't used to be, right? And looking at the people for whom marriage was a struggle, and whether they started out that way or got that way somewhere along the way, what were some of these key actions? And that's part of where these 12 things came from. These are all little. Now, they aren't necessarily all easy, right? Because it does take intentionality. For example, as a wife, to force yourself to not criticize, for example, and instead say thank you. To instead of criticizing when he comes home at 8:00 at night, don't you care about me? Why are you working so much? And that comes naturally. I hate to say it. For us as women, that tends to be absolutely what comes to our lips. And I hate that about myself, but I think many women can get that that's something that jumps to us naturally.
Right.
And it takes some effort to say instead, thank you for working so hard. Yeah. Thank you. I know you don't want to be away from us either, believing the best, right? And thank you for exhausting yourself to provide for the family. You're such a good husband. You know what? the beauty of that is it is not necessarily easy, but it is simple. Mm-hmm. And you try that a couple of times and you see this reaction from him. And I actually had one woman who came to one of my events. I'm sorry, this cracked me up. And she heard me talk about the importance and the power of saying thank you, which we women tend to go, really? Really? That really matters?
Yeah.
And I'm like, believe it or not, I wouldn't have thought it mattered, but it's this huge thing for guys, so try it. And so she went out on a break and she realized her husband had been putting together this like light fixture in their room for hours that morning when she had left the house. And she had just waltzed by and said bye and like hadn't thought to say thank you for spending those hours putting up the light fixture. So she went out and texted him and said, by the way, thank you for putting together the light fixture. I really appreciate that. And the fact that you're taking care of something that matters to me. She came up and she showed me the text string. His response was, who are you? And what have you done with my wife? And that's the thing, is that if you try this simple stuff, you might be in a really bad patch in your marriage. But I can almost guarantee you, now I hate to say it's not 100%, but it's close.
Yeah.
That the reaction that you see, it's going to be the best incentive for you to continue. Because you're going to see some of these things changing right away.
Yeah. So I love that you've given the Fantastic Five for the guys. What about for women? What does that look like?
Yeah, I know. Every woman in the audience is going, all right, when's it our turn? Come on. Yeah.
Exactly.
So here's an example of a few of those. We told the men that for guys, they tend to think it's really big things that make a wife feel loved. Right. Like, I have to buy her jewels or something or whatever, or take her on these big vacations. And the key is to say to her day to day, little things that say, I would choose you all over again. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that's the question in our hearts as women. And so some of the little things that we found that guys said that, like you're sitting together at a restaurant or at church, and he reaches out and puts his arm around her. Every woman is like, oh, because that makes you feel loved and special, and like he's saying you're mine. Mm-hmm. And guys feel that way. They just don't know that it matters so much. Just like we don't know saying thank you matters. Right. And so little things like, you're walking across a parking lot and he takes her hand. That's another thing that says, I would choose you all over again. So some of those little actions like that for guys to know really matter. Another one that was actually quite surprising to many men is that another area is that the men in these happy relationships, one of the things that they tended to do for their wives is when they were grumpy or morose or, the black cloud of doom hanging over your head, that they would shake it off and they would pull themselves out of a funk. And guys tend to think that if I'm in a bad mood, it's just affecting me. I'm just dealing with it internally. And it's like, no, actually not. It's affecting everybody in the household. And your wife is kind of feeling this stirred up feeling like, are we okay? And it's uncomfortable, it's painful. And so when you shake off that funk, and you were upset with her, but you shake it off and you pull yourself out of that mood, it's huge for your wife. Yeah. So guys need to know, again, not necessarily easy, all of them, but simple. And it's a matter of thinking about it.
I think about what you're sharing, these subtle, small things. Quite honestly, when you think about someone who's dating, in a dating relationship, they're doing these things subconsciously. They're just happening. They're natural.
Well, it's because it's not necessarily subconscious.
Maybe
There's
not subconscious.
Something in their mind that's like, I got to come on my best behavior, and this is needed.
They might have like a love cocktail, in their brain that's really pushing this forward, right? Yeah, I agree. It's not subconscious. That was a good catch. This is definitely conscious behavior that they're doing.
Or at least mindful in some way.
I don't know if you have an answer for this, but what happened? Why the shift from dating to all of a sudden now they're married and these things begin to not become reality?
Well, I can tell you for sure from the the reason the guys don't do this for girls. I know for sure why that happens. We've
Okay.
found that on the survey.
Yeah.
All the research that we've done has indicated that when a man gets married and a woman gets married, two different things happen in their brain. For a guy, once she walks down the aisle and says "I do," and they sign the marriage papers, it's like, okay, good. What's next? On to the next thing in the relationship, and it never really enters his mind ever again to question, does she really love me? Like that question isn't in there ever. Mm-hmm. It's like, of course she loves me. We're married. Right. It's like that terrible joke. Why do I need to tell her I love her? I told her when we got married. Yeah. If anything changes, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
And men don't realize, this is one of the things we found, we put in the book for men only, which is the one to help men understand women, is that there's no switch in a woman's brain. Unlike you, as a guy, there is no switch in her brain that gets flipped to this, oh, now I feel permanently loved position, right? I mean, that is never in a woman's mind, because our underlying question in our hearts, our underlying insecurity is, am I lovable?
Yeah.
Am I worthy of being loved? And so the question in marriage is, does he still love me? And would he choose me all over again? And when there's a conflict, it's, are we okay? And needing to be reassured. And so that's why a guy, he says, I love you. He takes her hand. He says all these things that say to her, I'm choosing you. I'm choosing you today. I'm still choosing you, because he's pursuing her. Right. And when he gets married, he doesn't know. That question never goes away. Every day she wonders, would he choose me all over again? And she needs to know the answer to that every day. Yeah. And it's not those big things like the big candlelight romantic dinner. It's the little ones, right. Like taking her hand when they're walking across the parking lot. That says, I would choose you all over again.
Yes.
So that's the reason the stuff doesn't tend to happen in marriage as much with the men. Except once they know that it's needed, it's like, oh, that is how I felt. I didn't know, right? So with the women, the reason we think the reason it tends not to happen is truly that women don't know the power of some of these things, like saying thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We tend not to criticize as much when we're trying, to get the relationship to begin with, because no one wants to be a witchy woman, right? I mean, we want to be someone he wants to spend the rest of his life with. So we are on our best behavior, but women just don't know how painful, truly painful, something like criticism is. We don't understand that when he's been working all day and he doesn't want to be away from his family, but he's doing it to say, I love you. And he comes in exhausted at 8 and she says, don't you care about me? Why are you working so much? Why don't you care about me and the kids? We have no idea as women that that's for a guy, that is excruciating. And so as a result, we also don't know how powerful it is when we say thank you. Yeah. And can we talk about the hours at some point? Is there another way of handling this? But handling it in a way that is thanking him and appreciating him. We don't know how powerful it is. So that's why we tend not to do that.
Yeah. So as you think about, again, one of the audiences that's listening is a lot of our military men and women who serve our country. Yeah. I know we don't have time to go into a lot of this, the secrets that you've found, but as you think about that audience, what would be 2 secrets that you would say this would be really helpful for you guys to understand?
Yeah, well, actually, I've done some work for the military myself, and first of all, thank you for your service. Yes. And that doesn't just mean the person overseas serving, but the one who's at home as well.
Right.
Believe me.
Yeah.
My hat's off to all of you.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you hear that enough, but that's really how we feel about you. I will tell you that big picture, one of the things that we have been studying in some of these military marriages that is really important for them to realize is the power of hope and the power of commitment. Because there is what I think, based on not enough research yet, I'm still kind of in the middle of it, my eyes are being open to something I think every military family needs to know. And that is, you have probably heard in the military that your marriages have a higher chance of divorce. You've probably heard in the military that you have greater risk factors. And certainly there probably are some greater marital risk factors. I mean, being separated is actually a risk factor, right? You have to be that much more purposeful about keeping your marriage strong. And we'll talk about that one in a minute.
Yeah.
But I do not see the numbers the same way that I have heard. I've heard it. I think that there is a bit of misunderstanding. I think there's a bit of an urban legend that has grown out of it. What I actually see is that the military families are confronting these things together with strength, with courage. There's difficulty, but that because they know they have to work at it and be purposeful, what I've seen in the numbers are stronger marriages.
That's awesome to hear.
And that it doesn't necessarily mean, certainly not easy,
Sure.
but I actually see depth and endurance and stuff that comes out of having to work through some of these things that most families will never have to work through.
Right.
Most families will never know. You have had to, and you're stronger for it.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, first of all, the most important thing, you say two things. The first of them is to don't buy into the lie that you guys have a greater risk, because then it gets easier when things start getting bad to say, well, probably half of us our marriages are going to end anyway. And so it's just, I'm one of the statistics, so why bother? No, you're not. I actually think you guys have a lower divorce rate than the average population, which also, by the way, isn't 50%.
Right. That's another book that you've written, which is very fascinating.
Yeah. But so that's the first thing, is realize the power of commitment to say, no, we're going to make it. Most of us do. We have the ability to have a stronger marriage, a more depth, fun, because we've overcome so much more that average people will never have to.
Yeah.
First of all, you have to believe that and live in that and walk in that and just assume this marriage, this is going to be your life partner for the rest of your life. And you can have a fantastic marriage. Yeah. So that's the first thing, is kind of just assume that. That makes a huge difference. The second thing is actually something that is important for any marriage, but I think especially critical for you guys when there is separation, anxiety, some of the level of anxiety that you face because of the physical risk that most couples don't, have to face. And that is truly, it's a mindset and an attitude of learning how to change how you think about things and learning how to change your feelings. We all, as people, tend to think that our feelings just are what they are. And it doesn't mean you act a certain way, but you kind of feel that way regardless. Like, I don't have to be mean, but I'm feeling mean inside, right? It turns out that it actually doesn't work that way. Is that the way our feelings are wired and our emotions are wired, is that we can change our feelings. In other words, like I talk about, for example, the importance of saying thank you to your husband and appreciating and respecting him. And some women might say, well, what if I don't? What if I don't appreciate him? What if I don't? And certainly you need to show appreciation and respect. That's his greatest need, regardless of whether you think he's earned it that day, just like you would want him to show you love, even if you weren't very lovable that day. Same thing.
Yeah.
So regardless of your feelings. But the beautiful thing is as you do that, you're going to find your feelings changing. As you say thank you, as you focus on the good rather than the bad, you're actually going to see the appreciation feelings start to arise. Same thing for men, is that if you stop yourself from saying, she doesn't appreciate me, nothing I do is good enough for her, she doesn't understand the sacrifice that I'm making. If you stop yourself from thinking that and instead say, she is such a good mom. She does all this stuff with the kids. I'm going to focus on the good, and I'm going to choose to believe that she does appreciate me. And look, actually, she said that yesterday. That's an example of how she does appreciate me. And then you're going to find that you feel differently about her. You're going to feel that affection rising up. So the key is to, instead of the natural tendency to focus on the negative, what they're not doing, what they're not giving, what they don't appreciate, what they don't love, to instead focus on what they do. Focus on the positive. find the one thing that says, you know what, she does appreciate me, or he does care about me, or yeah, this drove me crazy legitimately, but look at this thing he did over here. And you're going to find your feelings changing, and suddenly it'll become so much easier to do all this other stuff we've been talking about because you feel like it. So that learning how to change your feelings and change your attitude is absolutely critical for everybody. It's especially critical when you're not physically together, because it's one of the ways of keeping your friendship strong. So you like each other even when you're apart.
Right. What I love about that advice is that it doesn't require two people. It only requires one person, right? And I think that's so often, especially when you're struggling, you can't necessarily, it's not possible to change their behavior, their, motivation, but I can change my own internal action from a place of feeling to, I'm actually going to do something, right? I'm going to focus on the positive. So such great feedback for those who are struggling in their relationship. What advice would you give couples just for being able to begin to implement some of these tips that you've been sharing? What would be the starting place?
Pick one.
Pick one.
Don't
great
try
advice.
to do all of them. We actually, it's kind of embarrassing actually, but we always try to test the stuff that, we're talking about. Every one of my books and all of the surveys is that, it's sort of worthless unless you do something with them. And so we try to figure out, how do we implement it? How do we apply it? And so we had a group of people that was trying to apply all of these, and they just fell apart because they were trying to do all of them at once. And you're basically, if you think about it, you're trying to change a habit. Right? You're trying to, for example, if you always tend to assume he doesn't care about me, and you're trying to say, no, I know he does. Or, okay, look here and remember this he did this for me. Of course, that's a good thing. That's something I can appreciate. Whatever it is that you're trying to do, you're trying to change a mindset. You're trying to change a habit. You try to change 12 habits at once. Really?
Yeah.
That's not going to work.
Right.
And instead, pick one. And pick the one that you think is the most important for you. Find something that you think, what? I kind of need to practice saying thank you.
Yeah.
Or for the guy, I tend to get into a funk and I have the black cloud of doom hanging over my head, and okay, you know what? I'm going to practice shaking it off. I'm going to practice, focusing on something that I can say that, she's driving me crazy over here, but look at what a great mom she is, and talk to myself about what an amazing wife she is. And you know what? Where'd the black cloud go?
Right.
Went away. Practice one thing. And then once you've got that, then move on to the next one. And you're going to see, as you said, Noel, it only takes one person. It doesn't take both people having to do this.
Right.
You'll see an impact.
Which I think just, it really, to me, that speaks hope, right? If I can be in control of the outcome, it brings a different element of hope when you're feeling desperate and you're feeling like they're just not on the same page with me and they're really not motivated to make those changes. I think it's now trusting, right? I think part of it's trusting that it's going to happen. And
yes,
to that end, I don't know if you've seen any correlation to time, like as they begin to take that step to go after one of these things, the amount of time that it takes to begin to change the behavior and affect the other spouse.
Right, and to see that it kind of depends on what it is. Honestly, I hate to say it depends. In this case, it kind of does, because it depends on what's going on in your relationship.
That's true.
And so it sort of depends on how problematic things have gone. Now, there are some things that generally do tend to affect the other person right away. I would say, for example, for a woman to say thank you, to notice little things that he does and to say thank you for them.
Yep.
That's the kind of thing you're going to see responses right away. Now, if the relationship is really struggling, he might have that response like, "Who are you and what have you done with my wife?" Right? I mean, like, he might trust that you actually mean that, but don't give up.
Yeah.
Just keep doing it. On the husband's side, truly reassuring her when you're in the middle of a conflict that we're okay. That idea of being able, because that's another thing we didn't get a chance to talk about, but that has an immediate impact. You will be shocked how if you're in the middle of a conflict and you just want to get space, you just, I'm angry, I need some space. and you withdraw because you need some processing time as a guy. That's actually the way your brain is wired, legitimate.
Right.
But for her, as you withdraw, that makes her even more worried. Are we okay? Right. Mm-hmm. And if you can say, look, I'm angry. I can't even think, honey, I want you to know we'll get through this. We're okay. Can we talk about this tomorrow morning? I will talk about this tomorrow morning with you. Whew. You'll see a reaction. Those are things that you'll see a reaction right away. Yeah. For some of the bigger things, choosing to believe the best of your spouse's intentions, that's the kind of thing that you're going to see. It's more of a change in you, that you're going to see the mindset shifting, and you start seeing good in your spouse, for example. And it might take, a few weeks, but wow. And once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere. You'll see that mind shift in you start, maybe you attack the other person less. And so they feel less defensive. And so suddenly things are nicer in your relationship, but you don't know why. That's the kind of thing that could take a few weeks or a few months, but it's more because of the changes that are happening in your heart.
Yeah. What I found as I started reading your book, I just couldn't put it down. It was like one thing led to another, and it was just these shifts that I don't think we generally read about in these books on relationship help, which I thought
little shifts.
They're little shifts, but they're so the magnitude of that shift is significant. And so, Shaunti, thank you for sharing this with us. And what we've been talking about is the surprising secrets of highly happy marriages. And if you haven't read it, you need to do that today. You need to go buy her book, and you can do that. We have all of that information right below this video. And then you have a number of books that you kind of brought up in the this conversation, but we'll link out to all of those so you guys can make sure to grab some of this, because I think the perspective that you're coming from, using real research to drive conclusions, there's nothing more powerful than that. I think we all are looking for what is actually working, and we trust that the research is part of that equation. So thank you for your work. It truly is groundbreaking, and I'm excited to hear what the next what your next thing's going to be in it. But thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.